Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for August 14th, 2018. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the latest film and TV news, and we're also going to dive into the mailbag to answer some listener questions. This is Slash Film senior writer Ben Pearson, and joining me today on the show are managing editor Jacob Hall,
Hello, hello.
weekend editor Brad Oman,
Hey, that's me.
and writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
All right, guys, so let's talk about a couple news items first. Brad, yesterday I posed the question to you, what could MoviePass possibly do to make their situation worse? And it seems like, against all odds, they have somehow answered that question. What's the latest with MoviePass?
So yeah, we asked a question and MoviePass came back with quite the answer. Late last night, before MoviePass switches over to their new subscription plan starting on the 15th, which gives their subscribers 3 movies for the price of $9.95 a month, they decided to basically have customers who had already canceled their subscriptions be opted in to this new subscription plan, though that they canceled earlier this month or before the start of the new billing period. So a lot of people were posting on Twitter last night that they received an email saying, "Hey, thanks for opting in to the new subscription plan," and they were like, "Wait, what? I canceled this." And apparently, what was happening is, if you went into the app to either cancel your MoviePass or just go in to double check to make sure that it was canceled after you received that email, you basically had to accept or opt in into the new subscription plan in order to even access the app. And so in the email, it also said that if you opted into this new plan, then that actually trumped your cancellation previously. Now, you could have canceled again, but the problem is several users who tried to cancel again were given an error message. And this happened to me last night once I saw this was going on. I went to double check to make sure my account was still canceled. And in order to do that, had to, accept that there was a new plan that was going to be instituted, not realizing that you were accepting that this was the plan that you were re-enrolling in.
Wow.
And then I tried to cancel it again, and it kept saying fail, whatever the error was. It was like failed to cancel or something like that. And so finally today, this afternoon, apparently it's working now. I don't know if it was a glitch or MoviePass saw all the bad press they were getting for being shady people again. But now it seems like it's working. If you are one of the people who bought your MoviePass subscription through Costco, apparently they're also accepting returns on any of the annual MoviePass subscriptions that were purchased in their stores. But, this is, again, just another piece of shit move by a company who is desperate to hold on to as much money as they can as they desperately try to keep this sinking ship afloat.
Jacob, you had some comments about MoviePass yesterday. Does this latest update change your opinion at all or reinforce anything for you?
Yesterday, I wondered if CEO Mitch Lowe was stupid. Today, I'll say I don't think he's stupid, but I do think his company and possibly him are craven and are irresponsible. And all they're doing is paving the road for other people to do this right. I know we've discussed AMC's A-list on this show before, but just today, Alamo Drafthouse's beta program that they're testing on a few locations, it was revealed that 40,000 people have signed up to be on the wait list for it. So there's interest in this. People want this. This is the future of how we're going to watch movies. And MoviePass has dropped the ball so hard where they could have been the leader here. They could have been the Netflix. Instead, they're going to be, I don't know, the Blockbuster online service.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, yeah, speaking of things that may be irresponsible, there is one other news story that I thought warranted a little bit of discussion, and I wanted to bring you guys on to talk about this. So yesterday, a bit of a controversy arose about a YouTube ad for Warner Brothers' upcoming movie, The Nun. This is the film that's set inside the Conjuring universe. And the ad plays before, like a typical YouTube ad, it will play before a video that you go to YouTube to see, and I had all of you guys watch it. We'll link to the video in the article in the show notes, so you guys can all watch it, all the listeners at home. And basically, what it is it shows the volume icon pop up on your screen, and the volume begins to drop until it goes to mute, and then all of a sudden. And so this is over a black screen, so there's nothing there, no other noises other than just the volume seemingly turning down on your computer. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a giant nun fills the screen and screams at you for like 1 second, and it's basically a jump scare in the form of a pre-roll ad. So a lot of people were talking about how this is very problematic, especially parents of kids who rely on YouTube as like a primary source of entertainment. They're, worried that their young children might see an ad like this pop up before some Thomas the Tank Engine video or something like that. So I just wanted to sort of take the temperature of the room here and see what you guys thought about this, because I feel like there are two ways you can look at it. You can look at this as like, wow, this is a really crappy tactic, or you could maybe say that this is sort of a brilliant marketing ploy because it's getting a lot of people talking about it. It's, even though the coverage isn't necessarily positive about the movie, it's getting the word out there about The Nun in a way that otherwise might not have. So I just want to go around the circle and see what you guys think about this. Chris, you've been gone for a little while, so I want to hear from you. What do you think about this?
I remember when I first started using the internet many, many years ago, videos like this were all over the place, where it was sort of like just like this trend, I guess, where there were these jump scare videos where they tricked you into sort of like leaning into the screen, and then a ghoul face would appear, and you were terrified. So on that front, it's kind of like corny that The Nun is bringing that back, because I really haven't seen one of these videos since then, which had to be, I don't even want to guess how many years ago it was, but it was a long time ago. So on that front, it's kind of stupid, and I personally loathe the idea of jump scares. But like you said, this has people talking about The Nun, so maybe it actually is working. I don't know.
Brad, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a cheap scare. I'm not necessarily don't understand the concern about like their kids seeing this kind of ad, because I mean, usually these kinds of advertisements are programmed to only be paired with certain kinds of videos and things like that. So like, unless your kids are watching horror movie trailers or other things like that, I can't imagine this video is going to be the one that pops up as an advertisement for a Thomas the Tank Engine video.
Yeah, that was just me being ridiculous. But yes, your point is well taken.
But yeah, I mean, it's like Chris said, it's definitely, it feels like an old internet trend coming back. It's cheap, but if it's doing the trick and getting people talking, then obviously that's what's important for the studio and for the brand that is The Nun. Personally, I don't know. I wonder how many people it'll actually trick, because I mean the volume control is unique to the MacBook. So I wonder if just some people are just going to be so confused and annoyed that they might not even be scared by it. They're just going to be like, "What the hell's going on with my computer?" But I don't know. I guess I'm indifferent.
Yeah, I saw one person respond to our tweet about this story, and they were saying that the thing that they found the most troubling in the whole thing was not the jump scare aspect, but the idea that a marketing company would try to make it look like the controls on their own computer was being manipulated. Like, they found that to be more disturbing than the screaming nun. Jacob, I know you've actually seen some footage from the Nun. You wrote a big piece at Comic-Con this year when they showed you the first, or I guess a 10-minute chunk of the movie. What do you think about this? And also, do you think that based on the footage that you've seen and the teaser and stuff, do you think that they needed to go this way to sell this movie, or do you think it looks good enough where they could have sold it in a more traditional way?
Well, the footage we saw was a little different than most of the Conjuring verse movies. Almost the entire movie takes place in a Romanian castle, so it's very gothic, lots of spooky graveyards, fog, satanic imagery. I talked about this footage on the podcast and wrote about it on the site. We'll put a link in the show notes. But the movie looks really creepy and atmospheric, but it does have jump scares. That is the Conjuring versus bread and butter. That is what James Wan, who's producing this one and directed the first two Conjuring films, does well. So selling this jump scare is what gets the teenagers into the seats. It's the old horror fuddy-duddies like me and Chris who see the fog-swept graveyard and go, "Ooh, I want to see that." That's exciting to me. But I do think that selling the jump scares is important. But at the same time, as much as I enjoy jump scares and enjoy scares, I don't want this in my face when I'm on YouTube. I feel it's weirdly inappropriate. I don't like having I don't like being forced into a scare. The whole point of a horror movie is an issue of consent. You consent to being scared. You pay your ticket knowing you want to be scared. When you're just browsing around YouTube, you're chilling out. You didn't buy that ticket. But at the same time, I admire the hucksterism of it. This is like a total William Castle move. This is sort of creating outrage and hysteria to sell your movie. And I can be all PC about it and put on my monocle and then pop out my eye because I'm so offended, or I could just admire that Warner Brothers is just saying, "Screw y'all, horror movie." And I am actually on both wavelengths here.
Yeah, I'm sort of right there in the middle with this as well.
How would you guys feel if this was done for like if it was done for like a kids movie? Like, what if it's for like a Minions or Despicable Me movie, and like the volume is so much, and then all of a sudden like a minion appears and he just starts laughing at you, and he's like, ha ha ha, and says something in Minion gibberish, and it's like, it's a trick, we got you, come see Despicable Me 4.
I don't know.
That would be worse. I mean,
well, anything involving Minions would automatically be worse.
Wait, why? They love bananas.
I don't know. Does anybody have a response to that? Any? I don't know. What do you think? What do you guys think?
I mean, I don't want to get off on a tangent here, but I have a friend who has children, so he told me about that. Like, there are people who deliberately create like videos that are meant to look like children's videos for YouTube, but then they insert really creepy, weird shit in the middle of them. And he said this has happened like several times where like his kids will be watching YouTube and they'll be thinking they're watching some normal, harmless like cartoon, and in the middle of it they start talking about like dismemberment and stuff like that. So that actually is sort of like this weird, disturbing thing going on in the underbelly of YouTube. So I don't know.
Wow. Yeah, I did not expect this conversation to turn to that degree. All right. Well, I mean, I think that's pretty much it for the news aspect of today's show. I think normally, in a normal week, we do the water cooler episode on Monday, and that sort of gives us enough time to, I guess, bank up a couple of news stories to talk about. And there really hasn't been that much, I guess, podcast-worthy news over the past couple days. So instead of just, talking about things that don't really deserve to be talked about, I figured we would dive into the mailbag and answer a couple of listener questions. So Paul T. from Horsham, England, recently wrote into us, and he said that he, not too long ago, had a chance to see Incredibles 2, and he agreed with Peter that he found it to be a bit lacking in some areas. He thought it was a fun movie, but quote, was missing a lot of the wit, charm, and emotion I would normally associate with a Pixar movie. And then his second point was about a Kraven the Hunter movie, and we talked about this on a recent episode of the show. He said, you guys were reflecting on if anyone thought he was a good character to bring to the screen, or if there is even a story worth telling. Well, I can tell you that he is a beloved villain for Spider-Man fans, and that there is a lot of potential if they decided to adapt the Kraven's Last Hunt story arc. The only caveat I'd put in place for that is it only works if you have Spider-Man in it. I really hope Sony learns that the only thing that makes these villains of any interest is their interaction with Spidey and their overlapping stories. I could be wrong, but so far Venom looks like hot garbage, or should that be hot turd? Marvel Disney, please save us. So I posed the question, Jacob, I think you were not on this episode of the show, but I mentioned how you are always talking about how like certain comic book characters are having or have had in recent years have been like revitalized, and characters that might sound ridiculous on the face of them, like Kraven the Hunter, who is a big game hunter who hunts down Spider-Man in the comics and the animated TV show. He theoretically is getting his own solo movie. They've hired a writer for it, and I was just wondering, has Kraven had this sort of resurgence in the comics? Do you know of anything like that, Jacob? Have you read anything about a Kraven storyline, this Kraven's Last Hunt, for example, anything like that might make you think that this character might actually deserve a movie of his own?
Funny you should ask. Interestingly, Kraven's Last Hunt is the most famous Kraven storyline, but as Paul says, it requires a history of Spider-Man. The whole idea behind the storyline is that Kraven is dying, and he decides to pull all stops to get Spider-Man once and for all. But it banks on years of history between Kraven and Spider-Man. It banks on readers being invested in that dynamic. You strip that out, and suddenly the most recognizable story of that character doesn't have any power whatsoever. So Paul's right. That is the best Kraven storyline. It's the one people talk as a touchstone, but it's not a movie. The character does not have a movie in him. But interestingly, Kraven's been going through a weird, not quite resurgence, but he's been a regular reoccurring character in The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, our current ongoing Marvel comic that's wonderful and delightful. But it's actually a comedy series. It's set in the Marvel universe, but it's very silly, very family friendly, and Squirrel Girl and her allies going on all kinds of absurd adventures. One of the ongoing story arcs is Kraven at first trying to hunt Squirrel Girl and her friends, and essentially going through this realization that he's a bad guy and trying to change himself and better himself. And it's actually really sweet and charming and silly. And so most I've enjoyed Kraven in the years, but but once again, it relies entirely on your knowledge of Kraven being a guy who's tried to kill Spider-Man for 40 years in the comic books. So if you try to just isolate the story, it's like, why is this weirdo hunter guy hanging out with these colorful characters and realizing he's a bad person? It doesn't make any sense. As much as I'm enjoying it, it's not a movie.
Right. Yeah. And I think, we recently talked about how the Venom movie might actually be rated PG-13 because Sony is worried about having, solo R-rated movies, and they want there to be more Spider-Man crossover in the future. So theoretically, maybe this Kraven movie, if it ever actually happens, could include Spider-Man in it, and maybe they could adapt that story arc into a movie. So I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But I'm interested in hearing from everybody about any other Kraven story arcs that you guys think might make a good, or might be good for adaptation purposes. Moving on, Nicholas E. from Chicago, Illinois said, "Hey guys, I was just wondering if you had any horror films that traumatized you or really affected you as a child. For me, it was Chucky." Chris, I know you're a big horror fan. Any that stuck with you from childhood?
The one horror film that really traumatized me in childhood was Pet Sematary, because as a kid I was terrified of death. Unlike now, where I welcome it at every turn. But at the time, I was just like obsessed with the idea of dying, and it really like freaked me out. Like I would just lay in bed at night and be like, "Oh my God, I hope I don't die." And I don't know, if you've not seen Pet Sematary, that movie and that book is literally all about death, like from beginning to end. So, all I knew when seeing that movie it was a Stephen King thing. At the time, even that age, I was a Stephen King fan, but I was not prepared for how beholden to the idea of just death and dying that story was. So that movie really, really fucked me up as a kid.
That's cool. I have never seen Pet Sematary, and I just DVR'd it, so it's sitting on my DVR waiting for me to find a couple hours to carve out and watch it. So I'm looking forward to checking that out. Jacob, I know you're also really big into horror. Anything stick with you from childhood?
This is a weird thing. I didn't watch horror movies until I was maybe 10 or 11. And so by the time I was old enough to start watching horror movies, I feel like I was ready for it. So I don't have any childhood memories of specific horror movies upsetting me, but I do have two movies, or two things, a movie and TV show that horrified me for years and years. And I'll be brief. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. At the very end of the movie, when Julian Glover's Walter Donovan drinks from the wrong cup, when he chooses wisely, and he ages quickly and turns into a corpse and explodes, for years, I would cover my eyes during that scene, refuse to look, and I had nightmares about it. Similarly, there is an old episode of the Hammer House of Horror TV show called The House That Bled to Death. And for some reason, I was on a sick day when I was 4 or 5 years old at my grandparents' house. I was out at school. I turned on daytime TV. Whatever was on Nickelodeon was not appealing at the time. So I ended up on a rerun of Hammer House of Horror in the middle of the day. And for years, maybe even decades, I did not realize that The House That Bled to Death was a Hammer House of Horror episode. It was just a thing that messed me up real bad when I was a kid. So those are the two that stand out.
All right. Brad, how about you?
There weren't really any movies that I was thoroughly creeped out when I was a kid, but I do remember being young and there was a local video rental shop that we would go to get movies from on the weekend. And whenever I was walking around trying to find a movie, it never failed. I always ended up stumbling upon the VHS cover for the movie Dead Alive. And it always creeped me out because if you remember it, the image is a woman's face and her lips are being pulled apart by hands, and there's a decaying human skull inside of her mouth. And just the image and just the thought of that just always really freaked me out. And I definitely remember having nightmares just because of that image alone.
Yeah, I remember that one as well. And my answer to this question is also a VHS cover of a horror movie, and it's the cover of the first Hellraiser movie, where it's just Pinhead with all of those nails stuck in his head. It's just a close-up shot, like a bust of him. And I remember, I didn't see that movie until I don't know, probably 2013 or something like that. But for years and years as a kid, every time I went into Blockbuster, I would, sort of catch it out of the corner of my eye and be frightened all over again. And then, like, when I was really, really young, there was an animated special, like a Halloween special of Garfield. And Garfield and Odie, I remember, were hiding from these, like, ghost pirates or something. I just remember being really terrified at that. I mean, that's something that that's probably not exactly what Nicholas E. was asking for, but yeah, that was a way back in the day reference for me. So let's move on to our next question, and that is from Michael O. from Nashville, Tennessee. He said, I'm curious how you classify what year a movie falls in. I enjoyed your Best of 2018 podcast, but as I was looking some of the films up, it seems like IMDb and Letterboxd classify some of them as 2017 or even 2016 movies. Usually I would just add these movies to my personal 2018 rankings, but I always want to put an asterisk by these films, help destroy my OCD. So for you guys, how do you rank what year a movie falls in? What sort of categorization techniques do you abide by? Brad?
For me, when I'm putting together my year-end lists, I always make sure that I classify the movie based on when it was released in theaters, because so many times there are movies that will be on the festival circuit like towards the end of a year or even earlier in the year, and they won't get distribution until the next year, and that's when everybody else gets to see it. So for me, that's how I always take into account what the release date is for a movie. I know sometimes people will include certain movies that came out the year previously in the next year's list because they didn't get like a wide release until January. Sometimes that happens, especially when you see people who write movie lists from across the pond. They'll put together their lists, and the UK won't get certain awards contenders until January, and technically those are like the next year's movies for them. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's always whenever the first official theatrical release happens, that's the year that I'll include it in.
Okay, Chris, what about you?
Oh yeah, I'm the same. If it opens in a theater between January of the beginning of the year and December at the end of the year, that's my classification. A lot of times IMDb and Letterboxd, they're picking up sort of like a wrong information where they're going off of an incorrect date or a previously announced date, and sometimes it's not automatically updated, but if the film doesn't have an official release in that year, like I remember last year I saw The Death of Stalin at TIFF, and I was going to put that on my best of last year list, but that movie didn't get to distribution in the US until this year, so I deliberately removed it from my best of list at the time. So it just has to come out at some point within the year in question.
Even in limited release, or does it have to be wide release for you to count it?
No, I'm fine with limited because especially at the end of the year, a lot of stuff like, the quote unquote Oscar bait will be released only in like New York and LA just so it can qualify for an Oscar, and it won't really come to other theaters until January. But, technically it's been released, in the year in question. So to me, that counts.
Jacob, what about you?
Brad and Chris pretty much said what I would say. It's theatrical release, limited or full. That's when a movie's date is. That's when it should be dated. A festival does not count. Otherwise, Bodied would have been in my top 10 of last year. So I saw that last year at Fantastic Fest. I will say that a slash film does not have a style guide, but on our loose list of rules, one of them is a movie is defined its year by theatrical release. So that's the official slash film stance on it as well.
Cool. And speaking of Bodied, I think that just got a theatrical release for sometime this year, didn't it? Do you happen to know when that is off the top of your head?
Early November. I want to say November 2nd. It's YouTube bought it, so it will eventually be available on YouTube Premium. But Neon is giving it a theatrical release as well, and it's a great audience movie. So if it comes to you, you should see it.
Very cool. So a couple more mailbag questions to go through. Leanne R. from LA said that she just wanted to shout out to Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery. She said, like HT, I use the game as an excuse to take micro breaks at work, and it really helps pass the time. I'm a completionist at heart when it comes to video games, so I'm in this for the long haul. Thankfully, they do have many side quests in the game one of my favorite personal favorites being the Dueling Club and the addition of pets. Just wanted to add that there is also still a big fan base for the game. I've recently joined the subreddit for this, and it's got a good number of people, and I'm happy that I'm still part of it. So a quick shout out for Hogwarts Mystery there. HT recently talked about that on a water cooler episode of the podcast. So any other Hogwarts Mystery fans out there, it sounds like you're still in good company. And then finally, one from Connor B, who didn't leave his geographic location, which is defying the specific requests that we put at the end of every episode. But Connor B, I'm going to read your question anyway because it's specifically about Jacob and he's on the show today. So he says,
"Oh no,
Jacob went off on Twitter over the weekend. I think this might have been 2 weekends ago by the time we got this mailbag question. But in any case, Jacob went off on Twitter over the weekend on Mystery Science Theater 3000 / movie commentary that pokes fun of movies as being a low form of art or harmful. I feel as though he has mentioned other films as being so bad it's good, schlock, and stuff like that, so I'm confused as to how he can say that without being a total hypocrite. I would love for the whole crew to weigh in on their thoughts, and if they find things such as MST3K enjoyable or not. A lot of these films received a second lease on life due to MST3K. Rediscovering them, Best Worst Movie is a great example of this as well. I love the site and the podcast, but I vehemently disagree with Jacob on this point. So, Jacob, explain yourself. Give us some context for these tweets, and maybe read a couple of them, and yes, answer for yourself here.
I'm not going to pull up the tweets, but I'll give you guys a summary. Hi, Connor. I do appreciate the question. I appreciate the chance to clarify this. There's a local comedy troupe in Austin that does live commentary over movies where they make fun of the movie, poke fun at it, and people pay to go see it. And I'm not a fan of this because this troupe in particular doesn't do just bad movies or cult classics. They do good movies as well. Like one year they did There'll Be Blood. And recently they did Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds. And that's what contributed to my tweet. Because I think War of the Worlds is a genuinely great movie, one that's been misrepresented by moviegoers and by film writers, and a movie that's deserving of a second critical appraisal. And I think by making fun of it, by taking it into a room where it can be mocked, is doing damage to reappraising a movie that actually desperately needs someone to champion it and to say, hey, this is a overlooked thing that we all made fun of incorrectly 10 years ago. So that was my initial reaction, and it kind of spurred me into a bit of a Twitter rant, where I talk about how I don't like Mystery Science Theater 3000 or movie mocking shows like this at all, because I love bad movies. I've been on this podcast numerous times talking about the latest bad movie I've watched and how I love to find these things because there are incredible artists, people with incredible visions who have no talent. I mean, the most famous example is Ed Wood, but there's so many others, people who their reach exceeds their grasp, and they produce terrible, terrible movies that have pure artistic visions that are worth exploring. So I endorse watching bad movies. I endorse finding these outsider artists whose work is astonishingly bad, but so much fun to talk about, even maybe laugh at. But I endorse watching it yourself, maybe with some friends, and talking about it afterward, explaining why it's bad, trying to get to the bottom of why it's bad and how it's bad, whereas reducing it to a running stream of commentary and having people make fun of it for you rather than you engage with it directly and have you discover yourself why it's bad, that to me is where I find it dangerous, where these B movies that I love so much, these bad movies I love so much, are treated as jokes instead of being objects worthy of discussion. I hope that's clear. I mean, I know people on this podcast like Mystery Science Theater 3000. I know Brad's a fan, so I don't want to say people who like it are dog crap. That's not what I mean to say at all. But my personal opinion is that I would rather engage these movies on their own terms.
Brad, I know, I mean, like Jacob just mentioned, you are a fan of MST3K. What do you have to say about all this?
Yeah, I mean, I understand where Jacob is coming from. I can appreciate that. But I also am a huge fan of just comedy in general, and I feel like there's no harm in making fun of a bad movie, especially with, the reference that Mystery Science Theater 3000 and the creators behind it have for movies that are so bad they're good. There's definitely a charming aspect to it. The writers behind those shows are really funny, and especially when you take into account that somebody like Patton Oswalt, who is maybe one of the biggest cinephiles in the entire comedy community, like this is a show he's taking part in and that he's always loved, and he's also a comedian who has made a pretty good living providing commentary on movies that are both good and bad, writing jokes based around pop culture, film and television and all these things. And so I feel like to simply disregard the act of comedy making fun of a movie live or whether it's recorded like Mystery Science Theater 3000. I think it's a little bit short-sighted. Jacob's entitled to his opinion, obviously, and if he doesn't like it, he doesn't like it. No one should force him to go, enjoy laughs. But I find a lot of I think it's interesting because there are movies that you can watch by themselves and you can appreciate them and laugh at them when you find out they're so bad they're good. But you can get even more entertainment value, if you watch them again with a kind of funny commentary. And you'll often find some movies that you'll be amazed even exist with this commentary, and they also almost create a new level of appreciation in a different way that you might not have before, especially because plenty of people out there aren't necessarily clever enough to, make fun of a movie like that or really like sit around and have the kind of intellectual conversations we do about movies as to why they're bad and that kind of thing. So they're just enjoying them in a way that's different from what other people do.
Mm-hmm. Chris, how do you weigh in on this?
So I'm a huge Mystery Science Theater fan, but I do want to preface this by saying, as much as I love Mystery Science Theater, I think it has done, I don't want to say more harm than good, but it's definitely, so all right, here's the thing. Mystery Science Theater is done by people who know what they're doing, and unfortunately they do it in this very laid back, easy way where they make it look really easy, and it made everyone in the world think, oh, I can make fun of movies. I'm funny, but no, you're not funny. There are there's this entire world out there where people think they're hilarious and they're really not. And as a result, it's inspired this sort of like culture where people think, I'm gonna make fun of a movie loudly and everyone's gonna laugh at it, and it doesn't work, especially because Mystery Science Theater, though, especially the early seasons, those episodes were done sort of with good intentions, I want to say, where you can tell like they weren't trying to be mean, they were just trying to have fun. And that's one of the reasons I don't like Riff Tracks, which is the Mystery Science Theater spinoff, because I find those, even though it's the same people, some of the people, I find those to be a little too mean for their own good, and they also often do good movies, and that sort of goes against everything that made Mystery Science Theater so special. Like, they were doing not B movies, like Z grade movies that are so incompetently made that it's kind of a miracle that they exist at all. And that was sort of the part of the fun. If you're doing that same thing and making fun of like Titanic, you're wasting everyone's time. Like what are you doing? There's no reason to do that. Right. So that's sort of where I fall, where I love Mystery Science Theater, but I don't like any of its imitators.
Okay, yeah, I feel like we've covered the bases on on the entire gamut of opinions about this. Before we wrap up, I want to know, off the top of your heads, do you guys have any favorite so bad they're good movies? Either something that you grew up watching or loving, or something that you found more recently. Any that particularly stand out? Jacob, how about you?
There's a movie called Warriors of the Wasteland or The New Barbarians. I've seen under several different titles. And it's essentially a uber cheap Mad Max ripoff shot in essentially a single canyon. And it, oh man, I don't even know where to begin. What starts off as a Mad Max ripoff starts revealing its really kind of ugly, misguided politics about halfway through. And you start to realize that you've been watching this sort of Mad Max riff where somebody smuggled in a truly ugly, heinous right-wing worldview. And by the time you realize it, you're too trapped. You have to keep watching. And it's really bizarre. I don't recommend it widely because it'll upset people with some of its messages. But for people who want to see how like somebody clearly got paid to go make a really cheap Mad Max movie and came back with this political screed about how the gays are literally going to destroy the world and rape our protagonists. Yeah, oh boy. That's something that I came across one day, and I'm still fascinated by it.
Wow. Okay. For me, I think Boa versus Python, which is a 2004 movie that I'm pretty sure was made specifically for the Sci-Fi Channel. I remember that 2004 era was like I was graduating high school and just heading into college, and that was like the peak zone for me watching these really awful movies that my friends and I really enjoyed. We never really did the full MST3K treatment on them, but we watched a ton of really awful stuff. And then more recently, I think in like 2015, 2016, I came across this movie called Dangerous Men, and I wonder if any of you have seen this. I think it was a Draft House production, or at least Drafthouse Films found it and re-released it, and it's from this guy named John Rad, and this movie is just like, it's mind-boggling in how terrible it is, but it's also one of those things that Jacob was talking about earlier, where it's like intensely personal, and you can tell that nobody else on this earth could have made this movie. As weird and sort of out there as it is the result of a singular vision of this really bizarre guy. Jacob, do you remember this movie? Did you ever come across this one?
I've seen Dangerous Menace several times, including once years ago when Drafthouse was first trying to find interest in picking it up, and held a top secret screening that we weren't allowed to talk about for years, to friends of the Drafthouse family and local writers to say, like, what do you think about this thing? We know nothing about going in, and watching it was just one of the greatest holy crap experiences of my life. So and I ended up seeing it again at Fantastic Fest after Drafthouse officially bought it. And you're right, it's a truly deranged movie. It's wonderful.
Okay, Brad, how about you? Any favorite so bad they're good movies?
Every single Christmas, I watch Jingle All the Way, and I absolutely love it. It is awful. It is so cheesy. So, I mean, Jake Lloyd's in it, and he was not a good actor back then. Like, I know he's been definitely berated by Star Wars fans way too much, but he was not a good child actor. I mean, you have Arnold Schwarzenegger saying lines like, "Who said you could eat my cookies?" And it's perfect. Sinbad's in it, and they dress up as superheroes at the end. It's awesome. It is so bad, and I love every minute of it.
All right, Chris, how about you?
I'll list two. So one I've written about for the site. It's The Happening, which M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening, which is sort of like the film that made everyone give up on him for a few years. And I love that movie. And I don't know if it counts because a part of me really thinks he deliberately made that movie bad. And that's sort of the thing I wrote about, that he intentionally went out of his way to make a B movie. But even if he did, this thing is a miracle of how stupid and just ridiculous it is. And then the other one is another Drafthouse re-release. It's called the Miami Connection, which is about this band who are also ninjas. It's terrible, but I love watching it. It's just such a treat to watch because going back to what Jacob said, you can tell it's a film made by people who were really into this idea. Like I think they shot this movie over a period of years on weekends, and they just kept making it until it was done. And they were so committed to getting this terrible, shitty movie done. And you gotta respect that. People who are just so committed to getting something done, no matter how bad or inept it might be.
Miami Connection is fantastic, and Dragon Sound is the name of the band of ninjas that you're talking about. And man, if you guys have not heard of Miami Connection, seek it out. At least watch the trailer, and maybe that will convince you that that's a movie that you absolutely should go see. So that's going to do it for today's episode of Slash Film Daily. Before we leave, where can people find more of our work online? Brad, let's start with you.
Hey, if you're looking to find me online, you can check slashfilm.com. It's a website where we write about movies. You can also check me out on Twitter at Ethan_Anderton and listen to my podcast, Go Flix Yourself, on iTunes and other places where podcasts are sold.
Chris, how about you?
I'm also at slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at CEvangelista413.
Jacob?
I'm on slashfilm.com every single day, and I'm on Twitter where I'm at Jacob S. Hall.
I am also writing at slashfilm.com. I recently put together a video about how the team at a visual effects house called Digital Domain created Thanos in Avengers Infinity War. I'm going to put that in the show notes. It would do me a great honor if you took 10 minutes out of your day to watch this video, because I worked really hard on it. And you can find me on Twitter at Ben Pears. You can find more about all the stories we mentioned on today's show at slashfilm.com and linked inside the show notes. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find at the site. You can subscribe to Slash Film Daily on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send your feedback, questions, comments, and concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com, and be sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Please rate and review the podcast on iTunes. That's very important. Tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.